My name is Lynette Hawkins, and we are so excited that you're here. Today's seminar, Make Room to Welcome, will focus on 3 key steps. 1, create a hospitality mindset. 2, communicate a welcoming image. And 3, establish guest-friendly practices. I urge you to listen to each one of those, whether you're an usher, a greeter, or a person that sits in the pews. All of the information will be helpful as you shape action plans on how you can make room to welcome. A welcoming image is so important. It's so important that from the parking lot to the pews, people feel welcomed. I can tell you that one of the first things that I notice when I come to a church are the people. But for some people, they tell me the first thing they notice is whether or not there are any signs. So it really does vary from person to person. But creating a welcoming image is important. So the very second step that we're going to talk about today is how to communicate a welcoming image. How to communicate a welcoming image. I think about some of the research that I've seen. And research shares that people make up their mind whether they will return to a church within the first 4 to 8 minutes of their visit. They make up their mind whether they will return to a church within the first 4 to 8 minutes of a visit. Some research says 4 minutes, some research says 8. But in any case, between 4 to 8 minutes, people have made up their mind whether they will return to church. Well, when you think about what happens in those first 4 to 8 minutes, it's a little interesting. One of the things that I think about quite often is that most of the time, the pastor has not gotten up to speak when the people have already made up their mind whether they're going to return. Now, that doesn't mean they've made up their mind whether they will join a church, but they have made up their mind whether they will return to a church. That's very interesting, and it's very important for us to note. But I also want us to note that the 4 to 8 minutes we're talking about isn't necessarily 8 minutes to 11 if your church service starts at 11. What we're saying is those first 4 to 8 minutes of their visit. So if I drive into the parking lot at 10:30, then that's an important time. If I drive into the parking lot at 11:15, a little late, then that is when my first 4 to 8 minutes start. You have to think about that because those early moments matter. That's when people get what I call those impression moments, when they get their first impression of your church. What happens during those first 4 to 8 minutes? Can you imagine what goes on from the time someone drives near your church, from the curb all the way to the parking lot, to the pews, and inside the church? What happens? We're going to pause now, and we're going to actually have an opportunity to discuss what happens during those 4 to 8 minutes at your church. What happened in those first 4 to 8 minutes can help people form an impression. It's so important that we communicate a welcoming image. Why? Because we only get one chance to make a first impression. And so it's so important for us to make room to welcome by communicating a welcoming image.